I'd be sitting out there.
Okay, we are live and in color for a special council meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask everybody to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we have no clerk here tonight, so I will be doing the roll call. Alderperson Dean?
Here.
Alderperson Grimmer?
Here.
Alderperson Henry?
Here.
Alderperson Price? Not here. Alderperson Schaefer?
Here.
Alderperson Valdy?
Here.
Alderperson Eicher?
Here.
Mayor Kent Atwell? Present. City Administrator Tom Hafner?
Here.
Kathy Gutenhaus. I know I didn't say that right, but it's like I'm never going to get it right. I don't say it enough, that's why. Okay, so roll call is over, and hopefully Mr. Price will show up soon. City of Delafield citizens' comments. Is there anyone that would like to step forward for citizens' comments? Citizens' comments. Seeing no citizens' comments are now closed. And we will go into item number 5, discussion of possible action regarding Lake Country Fire and Rescue funding, fire fee development, and possible referendum wording. I'll let you kick it off, Mr. Hafner, but I just did want to make an opening statement that, we're all here with the same common goal, and that goal is to figure out a way to support Lake Country Fire and Rescue with funding that's available, and that the citizens of Delafield would be willing to spend in increased tax dollars to move the process forward. That's our goal here today.
Yeah, so the last time that we met, we identified that the town of Delafield is looking to go to referendum and have their question finalized by mid-January so they can be on the April ballot. And there seemed to be an interest on the council to go in the same direction, or at least consider going in the same direction. We talked about having this special meeting so that we can kind of all get on the same page and be prepared for our next meeting in mid-January to finalize a referendum question if that's what we want to do. Before you tonight, there are 2 different resolutions that provide 2 potential directions for a referendum. One of them, well, let me say that, first of all, both of them have 2 separate fees that would be on there, one for ambulance service, one for fire service. We would need to work with LCFR to identify whether we would divvy the cost based on call volumes or some other metric. But then in addition to that, what separates the 2 resolutions is one of them would require the city to take its negative adjustment to its levy limit calculation. And what that means is we'd have to subtract out the amount that we spent on those services in 2013. And current amount that we spent on those services is about $1.1 million. And in 2013, it was closer to about $700,000. So that would create about $400,000 of additional levy capacity that the city of Delafield could choose to use for other staffing, other purposes, or to not levy for it if they chose to go that direction. The other resolution provides the option that many municipalities these days, when dealing with levy limits, they want to preserve as much municipal levy capacity as possible. So the other referendum includes the wording in there that that in addition to approving the fees, the people are being asked to also approve that the city does not have to take any negative adjustment, and therefore it would essentially create over $1 million of levy capacity for the city. I don't know if we think we might need that amount or what we would do with that amount, but when you start talking about that amount of money being charged in fees and also staying on the levy, that's really starting to be a significant increase in cost to our residents. But what we need to decide tonight is, number one, do we want to go to referendum in April? Number two, do we want to confirm that we're going to referendum for a fee, which I think is the head nod consensus I've seen from the council in the past, or do we want to do a levy limit adjustment? And then finally, we need to identify the dollar amount that we're going to be proposing. There's a couple different options. There's certainly the dollar amount that's approved by the fire board for a 2024 budget. There's a separate dollar amount that was talked about by a couple of the head elected officials most recently, and that dollar amount would be based on expenses that preserve everything that we approved in the 2023 budget and have that same level of funding for 2024. So it includes all the municipalities' operating contribution, all of our capital contributions that were used for operating, and the significant fund balance contributions. And in addition to that, the discussion has been that we would add a 5% inflation factor on top of that. The thought was that that would significantly decrease expenses and come out with a much smaller number than what the fire board approved. I did have a meeting with the fire chief this afternoon, and it was identified that if we went in that direction and did not hire the additional 7 employees that are scheduled to be hired in 2024, that we would not be able to continue doing our interfacility transfers, and that we would have to call for mutual aid on some of our ambulance runs. And so he identified that his estimate is that the loss in interfacility transfers would be a $425,000 revenue loss, and he estimated that we would lose about $50,000 in ambulance fees on top of that. So that essentially would undo much of the cost savings that we were looking at trying to achieve. So when we ran through some numbers, we got 3 different fees to share with you. And one of the fees would be if we talked about just retaining that 2023 budget with the 5% growth, but backing out that lost revenue that the chief identifies. If that's what our target is, and we don't hire the 7 new employees for 2024, we'd be looking at a per rooftop, let me rephrase that, per emergency unit fee of $497 for 2024. And any single family house would be 1 emergency unit. For multifamily, it's what we're currently proposing is half an emergency unit per unit in an apartment. So like a 4-family would be 2 emergency units. And then we also currently have a schedule for commercial buildings that is based on square footage. So the larger your square footage, the more emergency units that you would pay. And that's still a little bit of a work in progress. I want to work with the fire chief on that in the next week or so. I think we can tweak that because right now a lot of the commercial properties are not paying as much under the fee as what they are currently paying with their property tax contribution towards fire and EMS. So I want to adjust that to equalize that more, and what that should do is that the cost per unit should go down, so the cost per single family house would go down. So that's $497 under that plan. If we supported the full budget as approved by the fire board, that fee would be $531. Excuse me. And that includes adding 3 new firefighters, 3 new lieutenants, and a mechanic to the staff. The fire chief this afternoon also brought up an additional proposal. This is just something that's being discussed out loud this afternoon and hasn't been run past the fire board or the other municipalities. But he identified that in the fire board approved plan, that in addition to fully staffing, and Matt, I'll ask you to come up and correct me if I get this wrong. In addition to fully staffing our stations with full-time employees, that it also does retain $180,000 in the intern program. And those interns are becoming almost impossible to find anymore. And that he would propose the possibility of eliminating that intern program and reducing their budget by that $180,000. And if that came to be, the fee would be $511. And so that's what I have for the council to start discussion on right now. Is there any other information that you would need from me or from the fire chief at this time?
Does the $497, the initial number you had, what happens with the capital money that is being used for the budget if 7 people are hired, if at $497?
So the city would still have to include our share of the capital funding in our capital budget.
For 2024?
So that's yet to be determined. The fire chief is actually starting to look at his capital budget now and is looking at presenting it in February and March. And I think it probably makes sense to include in addition to the future needs of the department, start to include some kind of a dollar amount in there to recuperate the amount we're spending in 2023 on operations instead of capital.
Okay. And another question is, is this moving to a fee? Are we suggesting that we are taking the entire cost of our, which was what, $1.1 million roughly in 2022, and translating that into a fee, into a fire fee? There's no mix of some goes to your property tax levy, some goes to a fee. It's all going to a fee.
We're taking all of the operations off of the tax levy and putting it on a fee.
Okay.
The capital would remain in our capital, and therefore would be included in future debt service payments that we make.
And when you create this capacity in the levy limit, can you refresh my memory on the 9 or 11 factors that go into the levy limit calculation? How long does that capacity remain?
As long as we continue levying for it. Once you don't levy for that amount, it goes away.
Right, so it might be you have a year, essentially, to use it, because then next year, your part of your levy calculation is based off the prior year spent.
Right.
Okay.
Anything you don't levy for, you lose.
Right. So you got a year to use it or lose it.
And then every year, you got to keep using it
Right.
or losing it.
Right.
Just to be clear, this is still just our fee. Like, this isn't including any of the other, this isn't a universal fee across the board, this is just ours.
Right, so this still is based on the current intermunicipal agreement, which has the city funding, a higher than our fair share percentage for 65% of the budget. For 65% of the budget, the first 65% of the budget gets put through a fixed amount where the city's percentage is 46%, and our actual fair share based on the current formula is 41%, and only 35% of the budget gets put through that.
Does any of this address after 2024? Like, if we're going to referendum, because this referendum proposal is just for 2024?
So the way it's written now, and that's a good point and something that needs to be talked about tonight. The way it's written now is it will identify, we have to fill in the blanks and put in what the fees would be for 2024, but then it says from that point forward, the fee is to be adjusted as approved by the Common Council.
Okay.
What would the the number B, I believe you said 497. What would it be if it was less the loss of revenue through intermunicipal transfers and so forth? I believe that was roughly 400,000. What was the fee if you didn't include that?
I don't have that number this evening. Matt, I don't know if you have the ability to calculate that this evening?
I thought it was like about 185 or something. Is that about right? Just trying to give a perspective. I don't need the exact number.
I don't have the number.
Well, it's less than that number.
It's definitely less than that number, significantly less than that number.
He wanted to come up.
Yeah, so if anybody would like to ask the fire chief to come up, if you have a particular question for him, that would be great. But until needed, I'm trying to focus the conversation amongst the council members. And if there is a need, that's why the chief is here, to answer any of those questions. But trying to take care of our business first, and then where we have gaps, we can get him to fill it in.
And then obviously our city attorney, Kathy Gutenkunst, is here with us this evening. And her and her assistant drafted the two resolutions. So if there's any questions about the resolution language or the legalities involved, she can certainly help us with those questions.
What is the, if we continue with the proposed changes, what would be the final, what is the final that would be after?
So again, I don't have it in hand this evening, but my recollection from past discussion is it gets up to be around $1,000.
So I think the concept you're seeing here is a more step-by-step approach, rather than paying for your entire 4 years of college upfront in one big lump sum, pay on an annual basis as the process goes along.
Right, but I have a hard time going to referendum saying we're going to approve 497 now, and then it's up to our discretion, and in 4 years it's $1,000. Like, that's a big difference. If we're going to go to referendum, I would rather be really upfront with people and say we're looking in 5 years to increase this to $1,000.
Well, we don't know.
Right, but I wanted to.
Or we could put a cap on it that said you couldn't increase the fee further in the referendum if that's what we so chose.
I would like there to be a cap on the language, so at least, I mean, even if it's $1,000, but just that people know what they're getting into, and what's been discussed here, because I think people are going to see this on the referendum and see, oh, 497, and they're not going to assume that we're talking about doubling that.
Does the referendum language break out per unit?
So the idea would be that the question would just have a dollar amount per emergency equivalent unit.
Okay.
And then in public education, people would come to understand that one house equals one unit, and then the scale for square footage for commercial properties and how many units commercial properties would equate to.
But then we could, to Danielle's point, you could put a not to exceed on there as well? Is that
Not to exceed for what year?
Well, then that makes your point moot.
The other thing is, you can't tie the hands of future councils, but
Right.
if you were to increase the fee, you could have, I don't know if it could be in the wording, but certainly the current council could make the decision that if we increase the fee, we'd go to referendum again.
So for the 531, we get everything that was approved by the fire board in their budget, and you get your 7 additional hires, is that correct?
For 2024?
Right, for the 531, as opposed to we're only saving $34,
Yeah.
and now he's not getting
Yeah.
the 7 hires. Now, my 2 cents is, if we're gonna go to referendum, at least go for the 531.
I mean, really what's happening there is why the difference isn't very much is because if you do the 7 additional hires, then you're retaining the $475,000 in revenue
Right,
to offset much of that.
I mean, that's my thought.
In the agreement with us paying, City of Delafield paying 65%.
We're not paying 65%. So of the first 65% of the budget, we're paying 46%.
Okay,
So the first 65% of the budget gets put through the grinder, and then that grinding, we pay 46%. And then the next 35% of the budget gets put through a different grinder, and that one we pay 41%. Does that make sense?
yeah, thanks. And the parcel definition, thinking of like single-family homes, which is most of the rooftops here, what about vacant lots or tax keys that have two dwellings? What happens?
So when you say two dwellings, are you talking about a duplex?
No, like a coach house, a cottage, back lot,
But there's a
Some
primary
individual owners
residence, there's a
have
primary residence on
and a
each lot you're
secondary.
talking about, right, Mark?
Primary residence and then a secondary on the same tax key or in the same property, same owner.
So right now, that's
I know it's an
in for
obscure
one.
thing, I just, question that'll come up.
Yeah, in the past, people have even talked about shouldn't agricultural land be responsible for some fire protection services, and right now they're not in for any.
Vacant lot would be,
What does this do for,
who would pay or not pay? Their residential lot,
For a vacant lot,
yeah,
they wouldn't pay anything until they would build a building on it.
okay.
That's under what, staff
Just trying to
is.
understand, I'm sure the question
Yeah.
will come up.
Yep.
Yeah.
what does it do for nonprofits, schools and churches?
They will incur a significant fee that they currently don't pay. So that'd be like Cushing School, St. John's, Oakwood Church, Elmbrook Church, all the churches.
And theirs would be based off a square foot.
Yes. If I remember right, I think Kettle Moraine, I think that was the high school. That was the biggest, but that's not in our, that was when we were talking about the universal fee.
Can you ballpark what that fee might be for some, like a church? Or just give us an estimate. I mean, how would we, St. John's, how do you calculate their buildings? And
So,
you
Matt-
calculate all their buildings?
Matt, were they up around 11 units? So the mayor is the chair of the meeting.
I'll invite Matt up for this one question, please. So what would St. John's, 11 buildings?
So St. John's, as it sits today, in the current plan, conceptual plan, is 171,300 square feet of their total rooftops. Under that, they qualified as an ESE class 10. And in the conceptual plan, an ESE class 10 was anything over that square footage. So you take 10 times the 497, 511, or 531. So they would.
So you're looking at $5,000.
But again, so I was looking to work with the chief on tweaking that, because right now, some of the big box are only paying about half. So I was almost looking at doubling that so that the big boxes are paying what they're currently paying in fire fees, but that would then trickle down to the not-for-profits too.
So we've got a church. What's our church? Elmbrook?
Elmbrook, Oakbrook, I mean, lots of churches, right?
Okay.
I think those are the two big ones.
And
A
they would pay similar-ish? Elmbrook, chief?
little bit less.
Try, 30, we have them by address, we don't have them by business name.
Sure.
Address and tax key, so I apologize.
And you said you're going to tweak this potentially
I would like to work on
for more?
tweaking it so the commercial is paying more closely to what they're currently being taxed for, which would have the additional result of lowering the fee for everybody, so lowering the fee per household.
So Oakwood Church is 3041 Oakwood Road. That's 29,715 square feet. So they're an ESC 5 in the current conceptual plan.
So currently $2,500, and I'm looking at potentially tweaking it so it's closer to double that.
And that's, in my opinion, those charges aren't unreasonable for fire service, for fire and EMS. We've often discussed the potential for pilot programs, payments in lieu of taxes for not-profits. So
Cushing is 6,500 square feet. Cushing School, what class, ESE class would that be?
I just need the address. I don't know the address of Cushing, otherwise I can look it up.
You don't have to look at the address, just because I know the square footage. I was just over there talking to John today, so I was just curious as to what class a 6,500 square foot building would be in.
I think Cushing is far bigger than.
Are you saying 65,000, Wayne?
65,000, I'm sorry, yes. Okay.
I was gonna say, I think Cushing is
220C Genesee Street,
227 Genesee, man.
correct. 227.
I- 67,000 square feet, ESC class 6.
So it'd be about 635, okay. And so you would be, Tom, considering like schools and churches lower and commercial, bigger box stores more,
No.
as far as a fee?
So they're all treated equally as commercial type properties. And so obviously the not-for-profit they don't pay anything right now, but the other commercial properties are paying about half of what they do in taxes. Therefore, I was looking at tweaking things so that it doubles it, which would also double it for the not-for-profits. So Cushing School right now is about $3,000, so they would be about $6,000. And what it does is it lowers it for the residential.
I'm just going to ask, can the non-for-profits be accounted for differently, or does it have to be the same?
Well, you'd have to make a legal argument that somehow protecting Cushing School costs less than protecting Walmart.
But they're not
per square
currently,
foot.
but they're not currently paying.
They're not currently paying because of the tax system that's used that does not tax not-for-profits. And the city chooses currently not to do pilot agreements.
Do we know what and this is going to go back to against the universal rooftop fee, do we know what our portion, what the universal rooftop would have been per unit if it had been with all of the municipalities?
I think we were talking 300 and something, if I remember, Matt.
I just would like to know what the difference is
Yeah.
there.
The conceptual, I'm going to stress the word conceptual, universal rooftop fee that was laid out, started at 363 and topped out at 507.
Topped out where?
507,
507, so it'd been 507 for 2026,
correct.
as opposed to under the IMA, right around $1,000 for 2026.
Okay. So if we, just a thought, if we're putting numbers in here of what the numbers would be, do we have to charge that amount for 2024? Like if we say, if we're putting into the referendum a number for, this is what we would like people to approve, is that what we have to charge for 2024?
No. At least we chose not to charge them all on our last referendum because we didn't need it. So we did not, even though we were allowed to, we did not implement the full amount because we didn't need it.
Okay.
We're always trying to be frugal with our
Yeah.
money.
So Kathy, if that's what they're trying to accomplish, would we add not to exceed in here?
Could add a not to exceed. This is the first draft at it, so Mr. Hafner
Yep.
had something to look at. We need to get feedback from the council as to what you really want to do.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw in my 2 cents on here. We had talked about doing the universal fee, and I think we were all okay with the numbers, with the universal fee, or the rooftop fee across the conceptual rooftop fee with all of the municipalities. I think that, at least speaking for myself, I know I was comfortable with that, approving that without referendum. Going to referendum is because we're talking about a $1,000 fee instead of a $500 fee. So I would like, if we're doing this as a referendum, I would rather throw the big number out there. And if I know that would significantly decrease the potential for it being approved. However, I feel like that's the reason that we're going to referendum. We're not going to referendum over $500. We're going to referendum over $1,000. So I would rather put that number on ballot, put the full number on the ballot and say that we're not intending to do this for 2024, but this is the number that we're probably going to in the next 3 years.
I mean, Danielle, what we could do, and this is what I envisioned we would do initially, if we go this direction, is put a number on there for 2024, another number for 2025, and another number for 2026.
Okay.
Sorry,
No, it's
trying
okay.
to do my best not to interrupt. The number, I know we've kicked around $1,000, and that was a number that was kicked around when we were doing straight rooftops. The board approved 2026 plan if you use the funding formula and then do the fee. So it's the same methodology and math that Tom and I used this afternoon to get you 497, 511, and 531.
Okay.
The board approved plan, fully built out, is $704.49 per ESC. So it is not $1,000.
Well, I apologize then, I was misremembering a number then.
Yeah, that was when we were just straight rooftops.
Matt, that includes the city of Delafield paying like 2.75 million?
Yes, the city of Delafield built out, the 2026 formula for the city would be $2,749,638.05. For a formula then fee of $704.49. But as Tom indicated, if we work on the commercial aspect of that, it will be under $700 undoubtedly. We figured every 5 ESEs today dropped it
A dollar?
$1, correct?
So potentially we, just ballparking it, we might be looking at, we could put together a referendum that said, something a little bit under 500 for 2024, maybe around 600 for 2025, and under 700 for 2026, depending how the numbers shake out here.
Are we putting the total, I'm sorry, going back to, are we putting the total amount for the fee or the rooftop, or the number per unit?
I mean, that's up to the council. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's easiest for people to comprehend when you just put the actual fee they'll be paying on there.
So you're asking for the whole number?
Like, are we, well, I mean, the number didn't change, it's just how it's being allocated, right? Is that correct?
Right.
So are we putting the $2 million number on there, or are we putting the $700 number on?
Again, that's for the council to decide, but in my opinion, it seems to me that the public would have an easier time understanding and digesting what it means to them if you put the actual fee on there that they'd be paying.
I agree.
Yeah,
Okay.
But are you
Agreed.
see,
absolutely.
Two concerns there. One is that, that's going to be a very large number to try to pass all at once. And what predicament are we in after April if it doesn't pass? we've lost our window to ask for permission to spend any amount of money over the levy limits. And we find ourselves in a situation where we've gone over this before in these council meetings. We find ourselves in a position where our voters just told us no to something, and then we're going to be asked or put in a position to have to turn around like Western Lakes just had to do and approve a fee or a levy increase without their permission. But I'm just saying those are concerns that we need to take into consideration here.
And to,
Do we know what, I'm sorry, do we know what the fee, like, because we did approve, sorry, forgive me, is there a fee for 2023? Like, are we, and I should know this, but is there a fee, did we approve a fee or did we do it as part of the levy?
part of the levy.
We did it as part of the levy.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's not a fee for 2023.
And to further emphasize what Kent is saying is if we have a failed referendum in April and we're in a position where either the council has to go against what the electorate told them or stick to within CPI plus 2%. If we stick to within CPI plus 2%, we can't afford to keep the 7 employees that we're hiring in 2023.
And we have the fire department has no capital budget because we just spent it.
Can we change this to that the council is comfortable, is planning to do this, the rooftop? See, what I have a hard time is it's not about whether or not we're supporting the fire department, so whether or not we're supporting the additional funds that should be covered by the 7 municipalities. Like, that's what it comes down to for me, is that this isn't distributed fairly. And so whether or not we're assuming that those additional funds is where I think needs to go to referendum, whether or not our constituents are okay with us approving those additional funds. That's where I'm coming from.
Can you clarify what you mean by additional
Well,
funds?
I mean,
Meaning the rooftop
The
fund?
difference,
Go ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry, the difference between the $500, if we did a straight rooftop with the 7 municipalities, is $500.
Right.
We're okay, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with saying that that's what's needed. What I'm struggling with now is there's a $200 difference between that and if we use the current distribution or the current system, we're now having $200 per unit more. That's where I think that needs to be left. That $200 a year is what per unit is what I think needs to be left up to our that's why we're going.
Well, you're saying the excess should be left up to voters.
That's where I'm saying, can we do it somewhere that way where we're saying that this is what's needed, this is what we're comfortable approving, that additional amount is what we're not comfortable approving, and that we need to go to referendum over that additional amount.
Let me be devil's advocate, but how do we get to be comfortable with spending $500 per rooftop, but then you're comfortable spending $500 per rooftop, but want approval to spend $700 per
Yes.
rooftop?
Yes. Because I think $500 per rooftop, if all of the others are doing that, is appropriate and is needed. That's where it's needed. If we're talking about the $700, that's disproportionately us paying that difference in 200 per unit.
So the downside of that would be if it does pass, then you are already guaranteeing that this, you use the term unfair, funding system is in stone for the next 3 years.
If it does pass?
If it does pass. If it's worded the way it is, that's a bargaining chip on the table for us to negotiate on an annual basis based on what the fire board puts in our lap. In other words, you are saying, as a person who would be voting in favor of this referendum language, that you are leaving it to the council's discretion as far as what those future funding changes should be for the fire fee, but you're also empowering them to do that negotiation annually, as opposed to saying, well, it just barely passed, that's the fire budget, there's no other things on the table for us to work with our partners as far as whether or not things should be renegotiated, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we lose our leverage.
And so another question, when we go to a fire fee, is that the only funds that can be used to fund the fire department? capital budget, operating budget, all of it? There's no other general fund that we could use to supplement it?
That doesn't say you can't do that.
Okay, so given that as a point, there is part of this referendum is also approving our ability to free up $400,000 in a levy limit that we're not using, that we wouldn't be using. So that could conceivably be applied toward that that $200 difference in future years for fire fees. And it's like that would be a funding source for this build out of this plan.
So the fee would just pay for the 500 and the levy capacity would cover the next 200?
Conceivably, is that an option? Because then, to your point, we are already asking for all those funds. It's just up to our discretion as to whether or not we do it each year or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that levy capacity goes away after
Not
a
if you
year, and
use
so
it.
you don't. If you use,
You'd have to levy it and bank it.
you'd have to levy, and then but then you're just moving on to the next step up. So why not levy for the entirety? If you're saying that we're going to levy for
I'll
X
fall
plus,
back. So this is like a 2-year plan. So
all plans are welcome.
But so I'm essentially saying I like the ability to say that this is an annual decision, like it should be,
Yeah.
for us to work with our partners in the other municipalities and the fire board as far as what is the right amount to pay, and this enables us to do it. And if people don't trust the council to spend this extra $200,000, I don't know why they're letting us spend $7.1 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got discretion to spend all that money. This is a decent amount of money, but it's something that anyone who sits in on the meetings watches us debate over whether we should paint a light pole for $5,000 or something. I mean, we do get into the nitty gritty and try to save every nickel. So this is a long way of saying I'm in favor of how this language is laid out. It gives us ability to carry forward with this plan through next year and work with our partners to take the next appropriate steps if they all prove out to be necessary. That's my 2 cents with.
I think we need to, the feedback that I've gotten from constituents is extremely supportive, and I like the nuance in it is, right now, the cost is 500-ish. And in the future, it's going to cost more. Costs go up. And so we have to have that ability to adjust to that. But I think we want to present that in that way, that this isn't, hey, we just want to get more money. This is to meet the costs as they come towards us. I think we got caught a little flat-footed, and that's, whatever, it doesn't matter. Hindsight is hopefully always 20/20. But looking forward, I think we just want to, be upfront with the cost. But it isn't a huge jump from 500-ish to 700-ish over the cost of, over the course of, let's say, 3 years or more in city budgets funding a fire department. It's just how I see it.
Tom, if we go with the $500 next year or this year, we have the ability the next year to keep it at 500 or go to 550 or go to 600?
You'd have the ability to decrease it, increase it?
Yeah. So we do have the flexibility, like some of the other, like Town and Delafield, they may not go with the same thing. So we may say, no, we can't do that either. We got to stick at 500. So we do have the flexibility a year from now to stay at 500, go to 550, go to 600, and then the next year we could stay at 600 or go to 650 or 700. Mm-hmm. But it's a year-by-year decision based on what we need and what the other cities are doing.
So just to comment, the reason I like the step-by-step approach is, there's things that are in the future that none of us can predict exactly how it's going to happen. The economy can change in the future, obviously, potentially go into a recession sometime in the next year or two. Labor markets and the pressures on those labor markets can change in the next year or two, as well as the state legislature is looking at addressing this, and they may come up with another idea for municipalities to be able to do this potentially within levy limits. That's why I like trying to do it step by step versus looking at the whole number right out of the get-go. Things can change. And we don't know how they're going to change, but let's address it at the time with the change that's happened.
And we don't want to be in a situation where we've got to go back to referendum again.
Well, if you know, I'm always going to be in favor of a referendum. If we're going to spend more than the levy limits, I don't care if you call it a fee or a levy limit increase. I want the citizens' permission to raise their taxes as the state legislature has asked us to do. So however we end up here, I sure hope that we end up in a process of getting a referendum and do it smartly and do it fiscally responsibly so that we can all sell it to the constituents that we know this money's being well spent. If we're just gonna arbitrarily decide that, you know, $500 is a fee and because we think it's low enough, we don't need to go to a referendum, that is not something I would support.
I think what I'd really like to see is something that's a more fair distribution with the municipalities. That's to me what is sticking with me. So that's what's so difficult for me to swallow right now, is that we are absorbing that there's such a huge difference in the budget now that it's so much more obvious how unequitable this is for our community and for our constituents. And whatever it would do to give you leverage to renegotiate that and for us to have it be more equitable, that's be my goal. That would be what I would like to see. So whatever you need to be able to leverage that and to put more pressure, that needs to be a more fair distribution. I think that's more important than the actual number.
And that's certainly a possibility, Danielle, but there's a lot of things that would have to happen, right?
Right.
It's not even just the municipalities, representatives agreeing, but if they do decide to go to referendum, then their citizens have to approve it as well. So, and City of Delafield has the most to gain of any community, so there's a clear understanding why we may be the ones that want that, but you got to put your shoes in the position of the other folks that also signed the same agreement. So I'm just saying it's a probability as to what the chances are that that's going to happen.
Daniel, I think one of two things needs to happen for us to gain the leverage to make that a reality. Number one, not fund the fire department as much as other communities want to. Or number two, be willing to approve a significant increase without referendum. Those are the two things that I think we would be attractive to other communities, that would encourage them to potentially consider adjusting the percentages.
But the latter failed.
Yeah, I was like, didn't
Meaning-
we try that?
What's that?
The latter part failed. Your negotiations were not successful in saying, hey, we wouldn't go to referendum. That was our, that was offered, and it wasn't necessarily adopted by other communities.
Yeah, so what would happen, it would have to be a failed referendum.
Right. Oh, I see. I see what you're saying. And I agree with Danielle. You know, a house in Wales and a house in the town and a house in the city should pay the same, because they essentially receive the same service, same response times, most similar guys showing up with similar vehicles. The formula was generated, wasn't generated on that, but in defense of the IMA, which I don't want to defend. I think it is antiquated. But the city does have a larger number of calls. And so that call volume is a big part of that IMA, and a larger population.
Now, there's two communities with larger populations than us, and the call volume is in the formula.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. if you've got a municipality that's using, their call volume is half of the total call volume per year, but they're paying the same per rooftop, I can see how other communities might see that as fair.
I mean, if you do the universal fee, essentially what you're saying is eliminate municipal boundaries, consider us as one district, and a house is a house.
And we don't want to ask after this meeting to have something written up that's going to take away our leverage to do that,
Agreed.
as Tim mentioned before.
Yep. I agree with that.
And the only reason we're not having that discussion now is there's an urgency here. Right? We don't, to renegotiate with the other communities is going to take more time than we have.
Well, the urgency is that we have a chance to ask the citizens of Delafield to have their input on this subject on an April ballot. Other than holding a special election, we don't have that opportunity again through the next budget cycle.
Right, we can't renegotiate in time to get this on the April ballot.
Not by whatever it is,
Or we would.
January 25th.
But we should open that negotiation, I believe.
Well, yeah, it took a lot to do it. I agree completely that it feels wrong, but it's not the discussion that we should be having because we can't do anything about that right now. It's not part of what we should be discussing because it's just we made that deal. We have to dance with the one that took us to the prom. But we're being asked about the language and the funding for a referendum, and I agree we should be looking at what we feel is a more equitable arrangement. We agreed to the arrangement. And so from my perspective, we have to look at, I actually agree with Kent that it's appropriate to ask the citizens for their input for raising their fees however we put it in and however much. But that's the discussion that we should be focused on, and everything else needs to come after.
But just a reminder, Jackie, when you say we agreed to those percentages, that was with a caveat that the cost can't go up more than CPI plus 2% in any year, and now we're multiplying it by 2.6 in a few years.
2.6.
And all I'll say is,
Huge.
I agree with Wayne that when you look at $497 versus $531, why wouldn't we do the $531? It just makes sense. But again, if we do the $531, I don't think we have the leverage to negotiate anything in the next year. As long as we continue sticking to the plan, why would anyone negotiate?
Yeah, I struggle because we approved the capital investment to be applied with the faith that we thought it was going towards a rooftop fee, and that fell apart right after. So I have a hard time with the let's trust the system kind of a thing. I like to see things in place before we're agreeing to things. So that's where I'm coming from as far as just I'm very skeptical. I'm just approving something. I would rather maintain the leverage to try to renegotiate this because this is not the same deal that we signed up for a couple of years ago.
Tom, let me ask you a question. If we approve this tonight going to say a $500 fee at a referendum, does that increase our ability to negotiate for the next 3 months to maybe go back to that flat rooftop rate? They're saying, hey, that this thing may die, and we're all kind of screwed. So they come back and say, okay, we'll do it. Could you pull the referendum, or are you stuck with it anyways?
I think the municipalities won't negotiate, and this is just my speculation, that they wouldn't negotiation, they'd wait to see what happens with the referendum. And then if the referendum fails, then that's where we would gain the leverage. But we're kind of screwed for 2024 then. Unless the council is willing to approve some significant increase despite the failed referendum.
What are your thoughts on that, Kent?
I don't like it. I can't imagine going and asking the citizens for permission to spend money and them telling us no, and us 3 weeks later changing our mind and doing it anyhow.
Yeah. But do we have
I
any
wouldn't
choice?
vote for me.
Right. But do we have any choice though at that point?
Yeah, it's CPI plus 2% at the end of the year, and they
That's it.
fire the 7 firefighters. That's what would happen with a failed referendum. Or other communities would just say, well, we'll spot you $700,000 or whatever. I don't think will
that's gonna
happen.
happen.
But I mean, we need to think about arguments against a flat universal rooftop fee across other municipalities too, because you can argue that if you're living in a densely populated area, that your fire protection services aren't just for your house, it's for your neighbor's house, so it doesn't start on fire and burn yours down. If you're on an 8-acre parcel in Genesee, you don't care what happens to your neighbor's house necessarily. You do, but it's not a threat to you. So there's different things that come into play when you talk about formulas across. So that's kind of a different argument again. I think what we need to do is address. I think this enables us to go ahead with the plan as presented by the chief if we want to. It enables us to modify it, work with the municipalities to take this slower if we want to. We don't have to spend it all just because they said we had authority to do it. It's them taking a little bit of a blind leap of faith in the fact that we can make decisions and lead. That's part of the election in April too. So I mean, I like this as the baseline tool, and don't take anything else off the table. But this is putting it right in their hands, saying, here's what we're looking at. This is what the next 2 years look like, and we're going to have to, if we want to move ahead with the plan as presented, we're going to have to raise your rates in between, in 2024 and 2025. But that's going to be part of the information that we need to get out to people, and that the chief needs to help us get out. And that is what those fees are and what the future looks like. So I think if these just showed up on the ballot, I doubt that it would pass. People need information. So.
You're saying you would like to see the 3 different years all on the?
No, I would like to see the way this is. I think that this leaves it open-ended enough for us to say, this is going to be a work in progress moving forward, and it's going to be council decisions as far as raising the rates in the future. That's my opinion.
So put the 2024 fee in there.
It's a number for 2024, and fire half of us next April if we don't do a good job, and then the other half the following year. That's what you know what I mean? It's putting accountability in our laps as opposed to a one-time shot at the whole package, and then what do we do? I think this is a more reasonable first step.
And probably a better chance of passing too.
Like I said, I think this is clearly talking about a fee and raising rates. These get voted down if people don't know what they're voting for in this general area. So I think we need education.
But this is written as a permanent $500 fee, correct?
No,
It was just 1 year?
$500 in 2024, and then subject to annual adjustments determined by the Common Council.
Okay. So it's basically a permanent, plus our adjustments that we decide to make.
And I'm comfortable with it because we're spelling out exactly what we're going to do, and we're asking for permission to do it.
Yeah.
But it's still a big number. I mean, there's a lot of people that are going to say $500. I can't afford that. I'm not going to vote for that. So that's where everybody has to feel confident that what we're doing here makes sense, and we all have to work to try to pass it if that's what we as a group agree on. It's not going to pass itself.
Kathy, just raising her hand.
One thing just to keep in mind, we should prepare a small summary of what the referendum is about, so it's on the ballot. And I would suggest if the Common Council is going to move forward with a referendum, that you give staff the authority to prepare that, so that we do have a very simple, straightforward statement as to why you're doing what you're doing. Because you're right, without the Lake Country Reporter or other daily newspapers, we don't have those really anymore. It's hard to get information out to people so that they're educated. So number one. Number two, there's been no conversation about the ambulance fee. So I just want to bring that forward, Tom. I'm not sure what your thinking on that was, but we did include it in the referendum based on our prior conversations.
What do you mean, like separating it out?
Right, if you look at the
Fire-
resolutions that we had prepared for tonight's meeting, we have a referendum on fire fee, we have a referendum on ambulance fee, and then we have a question on whether or not the electorate wants to have the city not go through the negative adjustment. So there's really three issues before the Common Council, from my perspective, from the resolution, is the fire fee, ambulance fee, and do you want to have the negative adjustment, or do you want to have the electorate waive the negative adjustment so that money stays in your budget for future use?
And the only difference between that negative adjustment is a levy cap of 1 million versus a levy cap, or cap room of 400,000, correct?
Yeah, but now that Kathy brings it up, I mean, what if people vote yes to the fire fee and no to the ambulance fee, or vice versa?
I was just thinking that.
Tom?
That becomes a major
I don't
problem.
think,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm not speaking correctly here, but I don't think people see a difference between those two things. I think they think of them one and the same. I don't know why we would, in a referendum question, have to separate them out.
I think that's up to the Common Council, but as you may recall, Mr. Atwell, the statute does address ambulance fees separately. So that's why we
Right.
broke it out.
Kathy, on the referendum question, can we just say a combined fire and ambulance fee of,
I don't know why we couldn't.
okay.
So it's
I
a
think that's
combined.
all.
We should do
I think
that.
we should absolutely do that. We do not want to
Absolutely.
be faced with even the chance of passing one and not the other.
Yeah, nowadays, elections are so close, so you could.
Absolutely. Well, Tom
is-
McWanago was 80 votes between passing and failing a fire referendum.
And this is just, a draft. So you guys give us direction. There's certain language we have to include via the statute. But if you give us direction, we'll tweak it any way you want.
The direction, at least so far, is one statement including fire and EMS, and the other is direct staff to develop a summary statement. Is that-
Kathy, you said that summary statement does appear on the ballot? Okay. And is there a word limit?
141 characters.
I don't know Tom, I don't know the answer to that question.
I wonder why you
So
asked that
speak.
question.
KISS principle, keep it simple. But yeah,
The main thing we want to do is say, what's going to happen if this passes and what's going to happen if this fails.
Yeah, that's it.
Without fear mongering, just the facts.
Yeah.
This is,
Yep.
it also needs to be, we do need to state that it is, that there is going to be a shift. The fire fee the operating cost for fire is moving from the general levy to a fee specific to fire. So this is not entirely an incremental cost increase. There's a credit that's moving from their existing tax levy for most, it would be for everybody. There's some credit you're getting for already paying
Yes.
your share of fire fees, the fire taxes that are going to a fee. You have to state that that we're moving it from the general levy to a fire fee.
It's roughly like 2/3 of it will be a credit.
And it's going to be really hard.
Depends on who it is.
So we're
How
not
to
asking
say
for
that?
500, we're asking for 350? Really?
For many people,
Well, then I'm going to ask for 350.
well, it's a total fee. It's going to be universal across all residents, because
but
that
I'm
number is
saying is that-
different for everybody.
But if there's already credit in the budget from before, is there a net cost 350 or is there a
Different
net
for
cost
everybody.
500?
If your house is valued $1 different than your neighbor's, your fee difference is different. Your credit's different. The amount of taxes you're currently paying.
Yeah.
You're paying 1/7 of your taxes, city taxes, for fire right now, approximately. If you move it to a fee,
I'll be able to.
that'll change. That'll
I'll-
change.
I'll be able to identify the cost per $1,000 of value that your taxes will go down due to the negative adjustment that has to be taken. And just to be clear, we do want to do the resolution based on the negative adjustment and not being able to capture all of the amount in the levy limit increase.
Yeah, we're not going to spend. We're not
we're
going
not
to
gonna
jack taxes $1 million next
Right.
year.
Okay, just want to confirm.
And there's some simplicity in that, in terms of removing that section from the referendum.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Hey, Chief, just so I have the number here, if you took out the $400,000 for the loss of intermunicipal transfers and such from the 7 people, what does that number go down to if you have your computer there? It was 497. I just wonder what the number is.
I can get that number to Tom tomorrow. To do
Okay.
math on the fly in a public meeting with cameras, I think is a little.
Okay.
Does that number include? Is that every municipal or whatever, every transfer, or just this percentage we're likely to lose if we don't have those people?
So the thing is the 2024 staffing plan that was laid out and approved by the board, the transition in 2024 transitions the intern program from part of the daily schedule to off of the daily schedule. So those are the positions that are being transferred, I guess, in that regard. And as part of that, that is the hire of 6. So right now, I can put it into perspective for you. We have 2 interns in the program. 2 of the 6 slots are filled. We've ran hiring processes for this since continuous since about June or July of last year and gotten 0 applicants for it. That program is clearly sunsetting, and the reason why it's sunsetting is the same people that come into that program can get hired full-time somewhere else. So without the continued support of that program or transitioning those positions over to full-time like we've identified, we will ultimately have to close fire stations more than we would like, which when we close fire stations, we only have 2 ambulances in service for the 79
okay.
square miles.
All right.
So, yeah.
It's not a light switch, it's an erosion.
It just is. It's, yeah.
right.
Okay, so just from your report, I guess, in 2023, you had 7 firefighters and paramedics at a cost of $923,000. And then the next 7 that you have in your budget or documentation supporting your phased-in approach is 2024, 3 firefighters and paramedics, 3 lieutenants, and 1 mechanic for $969. So, I don't know, my simple mind, it would cut that number in half, just as a working number.
Again, I want to do the math, and Tom and I, if you want to give Tom the direction, Tom and I have a meeting on Thursday. We can kind of crunch that. The one thing
I want direction from the Common Council tonight on what the referendum's going to be. Not, I mean, we're in a time crunch. So I'd be looking for a motion tonight on, what budget are we achieving and what tweaks do we want to the resolution?
We've got tweaks to combining the statements. We've got tweaks to removal of the language, combining EMS and fire. We've got, and I could make that separate motion. Do you want these separate motions?
One motion, I think, would serve us well, unless it's
I
easier.
just know what I know now.
And I also think we talked about including not to exceed in the language. No?
I would rather not.
So if we don't do not to exceed, then that, in my opinion, and Kathy, you can confirm this, whatever the amount is, that's what it is. You can't charge less than that or more than that for 2024.
Well, I see. Not to exceed for that year. So not to exceed the 497 number. Not.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. I agree with that.
I mean, that doesn't hurt.
That allows us to make it what we need to tweak it down if we had to.
I mean, if some other community passes
Otherwise,
a lower budget.
I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
You're just talking
Yes,
about
yes.
year 1.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, good.
So including not to exceed.
And do we add a statement that fire and rescue payment, tax, whatever is removed from the tax levy, and
That's
now fully supported by the fee?
That's the summary statement that you're referencing?
That would be part of the
That-
summary,
that
not part of
That would be
the
the
Yes.
summary, not part of
Right.
the.
That
doesn't have-
component might become too complex for being part of the summary statement. That might be more in a FAQ document that we put out as part of public education for the referendum.
Yeah.
But you don't need a motion for that.
No.
No.
Tom, I do think you need a motion. The motion should include a directive that staff prepare a brief statement to go on the referendum. Because this has to be submitted to the county by January 24th.
You got that?
And we have
Ron?
one more meeting before then.
Okay.
And the only other thing would be the dollar amount, and I'm hearing the 2024 Fire Board approved budget.
The 531.
531.
But you said that does not give you the ability to leverage.
In my opinion, correct.
Say that again, I'm sorry. That
He
would
said
what?
that the full budget, approving the full budget does not give him the ability to leverage with,
Unless the referendum fails.
unless the referendum fails. If we approve the 497, you have more ability to leverage with the other communities.
That's what he said.
Right. In theory, we could still supplement some of the remaining budget.
Yeah. I don't know why we would use a number over 497 as a max.
And by the time we tweak the commercial, it may come down to 497,
Yeah.
even with the full fire board budget.
So then why are we making a motion with a specific dollar amount?
We're not, we're talking about,
Not to exceed, yeah.
like,
Not to
as far as a
exceed.
dollar amount, we're talking about the fire board budget or
Okay,
a portion of the fire board budget or that kind of direction.
I'll make a motion to, hold on. Gotta make sure I got everything
Good
here.
luck.
I'll make a motion to direct our city administrator to, number one, create a referendum language that includes the 2024 fire board budget. Two, combines the EMS and fire protection into one statement, removes the referenced reduced levy amounts, and includes a brief summary statement for public understanding and of the referendum.
Second it.
Just to be clear, we're talking about.
Paul seconded.
Paul seconded it?
Yep.
Just to be clear, we're talking about removing the language to reduce the levy limit? So we'd be levying the full, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I just want to make sure I understand what the motion is.
I'm talking about removing the language that says that we would reduce the levy limit, so we don't need that levy capacity of $1 million versus what we would gain without that language, which is roughly 400,000.
So we would be reducing the levy. I'm sorry, I
Yes.
just want to make sure we're
Yes.
removing the language that we must reduce,
So I think what Matt is
Would
trying
not
to say, is to go for the resolution option that includes the negative adjustment.
Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
okay, that was what I was like.
Because as the statute requires, if you want to have a waiver of the negative adjustment, you have to have a referendum. So I think the issue, you want to absorb the levy reduction based on the statute.
Correct.
Correct,
We need that.
That's what he said.
correct.
And did you included a not to exceed statement for the,
Where's our clerk? Did I include a not to exceed?
No.
I'll amend my motion to include a not to exceed of,
for the 2024
for the
budget?
2024 fire budget, because we don't have yeah.
You know, amend
Paul,
my
you
second.
concur?
I
Second?
concur,
Second.
second.
Okay, so amended. Kathy, was there any other clarification you were looking for?
I think Tom and I have some homework to do. So just so I'm clear, the motion is to have a resolution prepared that would have a referendum language combining fire and EMS, not to exceed the 2024 fire board budget, remove any waiver language from the levy reduction, and direct staff to prepare a brief statement as to why the referendum is necessary, or why it's on the ballot.
Beautiful.
When you say not to exceed the 2024 fire budget, that's going to be converted into a dollar amount that Matt and I figure out and tell you what it is.
And I think from what I heard the mayor say that there's another meeting coming up in January where we would have the actual resolution with
Yes.
the new
Yes.
language
Yes.
for you to look at. But I just want to make sure Tom and I, more Tom because he's doing the math, I'm not, have direction of what you're looking to receive.
Yep.
That's
Okay.
it?
And I wrote that down, Mr. Mayor, because I don't think we have a clerk.
So that answers all your questions. Tom, is there any clarity that you're still looking for?
No, this is very good direction. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Passes.
Nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further business, we are now adjourned at 6:15.
My rough math shows 900 grand is the cutoff point.